Greetings! Anton here. We're doing something a little bit different for this devlog for hot dogs, horseshoes, and hand grenades. Most of what I worked on this past week is either not yet in the game or is in the game but is not a very visual change. And so what I thought I would do this week for our devlog is to talk about levels a little bit and talk about both a little bit, for those of you who don't know yet, sort of like how a level in H3 comes together, a little bit of the history of how I've been putting levels together in H3 and some of the challenges of that, and what I'm going to be doing in the future, as well as a couple previews right out of Maya where I'm modeling of some of the environment pieces that I am blocking out and prototyping. As for the content that's actually in the update, we'll talk about that at the end of this video, as there is a build today. It is going to be on the alpha branch, and I'll explain why in a bit. But let's go ahead and switch our view. Boop, there we go. Over to taking a look at Unity, and many of you, most of you should probably be quite familiar with the layout of this level. So where I want to start today is in talking about sort of environment design and kit design. And what I mean by kit is basically like, what are the pieces that are used to put a level together? Some of H3's levels are built using what are called modular tile kits, where essentially what I do is I build all these little pieces almost like a Lego set in certain styles with certain consistent dimensions that all plug together, and then I build the level out of those. Whereas other levels in H3 are built of what's called unique geo, meaning that just the pieces of the level were modeled in exactly one configuration, and then just sort of imported directly into Unity to be used. So, and there's like benefits. Some games are built almost entirely on a kit logic. Some games are built almost entirely on a unique geologic. Most nowadays are some, mix of the two. Not all of the ones that use modular stuff do it on a grid. Like they may have kits that are a bunch of separate little pieces that go together, but aren't necessarily regimented. So if we look at the existing Take and Hold Classic level, this is using the Hallways tile kit that I built so many years ago now, for better and for worse. And each one of these rooms is sort of composed. This is a system built on a 4 meter by 4 meter tile. If we go like this, we can sort of see. Do we have a? I think Unity only shows the grid right near the center of the scene, or I just have it disabled, as I usually do. Yep, I can't even remember how to turn that on. So yeah, so these are all on 4 grids, and if I grab one of these, I can actually bring the project window over here, and you can see how a tile set like this has just like a bajillion independent pieces. They're like, coming up with the naming schema can be one of the challenges, even in designing these sorts of things, various sorts of walls. And this is in many ways the downside of trying to make or one of the downsides of trying to make a modular tile set that handles every given case that you might have for how you want to assemble a level, is that you get what's called permutation explosion, where you're like, okay, I have a straight wall and it has a door, and I've got a straight wall and it's a door and it's got a column here, and a straight wall and it's a door and column here, and a weird thing on the ceiling, and suddenly you have hundreds of pieces. It gets tedious to both manage as well as sometimes to use. And so some of these, this set has several what are called sub-kits, meaning that there are the sort of room pieces that we see here. There are the wide halls that you can see have a slightly different atomization. Like that's basically a 2x2 piece is our T section, straights, short straights, curves, etc. And then there is our little green hall mini sections. So I built this, as I said, years ago. It served well in the game, but because of the fact that this was really the first modular tile set that I ever built as a game developer, I was super concerned about like that the pieces all fit together really well, and that there was sort of like coherency of all the meshes, and that they're all evenly textured, and all of these things from a real technical standpoint, but hadn't really, spent probably enough iteration time or thinking time on whether those pieces sort of came together and assembled spaces and rooms that were really visually or tactically interesting. And this is one of the reasons why, as much as there are elements of this kit that are really nice, and I really like the relationship of big halls, back halls, and rooms, if we look at the actual hold rooms that are in this level and are produced by this tile set, most of them are just sort of like blah. We're like, oh wow, it's a rectangle with a stair in it, and like, oh, it's a different rectangle with a stair in it. And as I said, a lot of that was just because of the fact that this was my first time building something like this. It's a lot of person hours of work to produce a tested, modular kit like this, that works and doesn't have irritating corner cases. And so there's some problems with it from a design standpoint that those of you who've played Take and Hold definitely have run into. There's some weird collision issues. Like, I decided for some reason to create this little collision wrap molding in between the levels, which I liked as a way to visually break up these rooms, but then has like weird issues where, like, if you're running right against the wall under the stairs, your head can sort of be pressed down into the ground as it attempts to resolve being beneath this collider. Yeah, it's suboptimal. And frankly put, a lot of like H3's locomotion systems even were tuned and made more advanced after this tile set already existed. And so while it has served the game in a bunch of ways, I'm never going to build another level using this tile set. And so I've begun to work on another one. But before we take a look at some of the stuff that I've been doing there, I want to show you for an opposing example of the other way that one can, and the way I sometimes do build a level, is something, and this level was actually a collab. Marstruck did some of the meshing for this, is we have Grill House, where this is not at all built on a tile logic. It's built to a consistent dimensional logic where a floor is a certain number of height, door frames are all the same, windows are the same, and there's definitely sort of like a cohesive geometric style that's holding the whole thing together. But each one of these is a completely unique mesh. If I just select this here, you can see this entire outside part of the building is just a single mesh. It doesn't break apart down into smaller pieces. Individual rooms within one of these buildings are basically single meshes. So each one of these buildings is something on the order of 4 to 10 total meshes. Oh, this one is all just one. There's the interior. You can see the light map seams there. And so obviously this helps produce something that, especially for an outdoor scene, feels way more naturalistic. But obviously it's not built from a kit logic. So you are, in a sense, making design decisions about the space back over in a modeling application. Most often, some people use things like Pro Builder, and they actually do all of their meshing directly in the engine. In Unity, I hate those tools because I'm old and just prefer to continue using Maya. But that's just to give you an idea. If you've ever been looking and being like, why do some spaces in H3 feel one way? Why do some feel like others? Another example is Rotwieners. If we pull this open real quick. This might have been a mistake. This will actually take a second to load, as it loads just a tremendous amount of content into RAM. All right, loaded up. This actually performs pretty terribly in editor. We're going to turn off the fog here. But Rotwieners is actually built. It's the only reason I was able to put something this large together in the time that I did. This is also built using a sort of tile logic for the ground that many of you have probably picked up on, sort of moving around. There's a lot of repeated forms in terms of that. The roads are their own separate objects, like so. And then even the individual, if we look at some of the buildings, these two were sort of built out of tiles. This actually, Rotwieners is a great example of the downside from a performance standpoint of going super kit built, especially with like an older version of a game engine like what I'm using here, which is that there are so many individual pieces that even with the in-engine systems that should ostensibly what's called batch these things together and make it so the engine can just be like, these things all have the same wood on them, draw them all at once. This Rotwieners runs a little poorly, and part of that has to do with the monumental scale of it as a map, and just the sheer number of entities that are in it. Like even the editor, as you can see here, is giving us a whole 3 to 4 frames per second just rotating around it, because there's so much of it. And this map is, but so it's kind of like this double-edged sword where like the building, authoring things in this tile-based way enables you to produce a large volume of content very fast, but it also imposes this ceiling on the amount of it that you can end up having before you run into certain axes of performance issues. But so given all of that, what am I doing next? So I have mentioned before, I mentioned in the sort of roadmap at the beginning of the year that one of the things that I wanted to do this year was get another take and hold map in, something that the competitive scene would really enjoy, and really just something that is a proper response from me as a designer to how the mode has evolved, how the competitive scene is involved, and just seeing at this point with a bunch of years, like what's fun and what's not in take and hold. Because as much as I put in a second level, the Winter Wasteland, or Northeast Dakota, adapted from the Winter Wasteland, that level was not originally designed for take and hold. It was designed for the Winter Wasteland Meat Miss event, and there are certain ways it was really fun to explore and take and hold, but it's a bit too big, too long sight distances, too much traversal. But that was an important thing to just learn as part of the design. And so what I intend to do next for this sort of third level is split the difference a little bit closer to hallways in terms of scale, but to create something that is a little more compact or larger than the classic hallways map, but still compact enough that there isn't a bunch of wasted time doing traversal, but with hold points that have an immensity of scale and a little more drama to them. So let's pop over to Maya here. This theme that you're going to see, especially if you have any kind of architectural background, this level is like Anton rips off like a dozen or more really cool brutalist buildings that have existed. But I've been working on, these are just blockouts still. This isn't final geo, but of trying to essentially build as not tile set logic, but unique geo hold points for a level. They'd each have a unique character to them, a unique flow, and sort of feeling, so that they're a little more identifiable. Like, oh, I'm over in the one that feels like a library. This is the one that's, a big atrium. And then to have tile set logic be used for all of the sort of halls that connect everything and create the larger complex. So here is the first one of those. This one is whereas I'm still, even though these aren't a tile set logic construction, they're still using the dimension set or constrained by the dimension set of a tile set, because there are going to be hallway pieces that are in 8 by 8 by 8 meter chunks. And so if we imagine here, this one is actually centered off grid. So if there were essentially, one thing is placed wrong here. Always find a problem when you're showing stuff to people live. So imagine that there's a hallway here that is designed to connect this entrance and this entrance here. Their actual displacement wouldn't be quite like this. It'd be something closer to that, with little connection points at the doors. Like so. There we go. So just imagining that there'd be an external hallway here, this room would be completely sealed off. And a lot of what I've been thinking about as I've been working on these is sort of what makes a good hold room in H3. If we actually go back to our classic level here. So if we look at the classic level, many of you will know that like most of the hold rooms in this level and frankly put, a lot of the engagements that you're going to be taking are inside a range band, basically about 20 meters or closer, that once you're practiced in the game, you basically don't have to aim. You can do a tremendous amount of your gunfighting, hip firing, or in that like intermediate hip fire position where you haven't come all the way up to sights, but your gun's sort of aligned with your head, a little bit below your head, and you can tell roughly, you can sort of adjust during a spray. And so it's only really challenging you with a certain subset of gunfighting skills in the level, because just there aren't sufficient distances that accurate shooting is really necessary, unless you're sometimes in blue hallway, but definitely in the red room. That's a long enough distance that you actually are having to really come up to irons, even if you're very practiced, to take accurate shots. And so I want a little more of that present. And so while the average hold area in this level is on the like 8 to 12 by 20, all of the hold points in the new level are going to basically be 24 by 24 and larger. So this is one of those. Let's pull up another. Here's another that has 3 stories in it with symmetrical stairs. One of the things that I really want to play with as well is that I think one of the things that becomes stale about hold points in Take and Hold is that, especially in the classic level, there's between 2 and 3 entrances to basically every room, which means it's super predictable every wave where you're going to become assailed from. But the system actually supports internally n number of entrances. It'll only pick up to 2 to 3 of them per wave, but if, say, there's 6 ways to get into a room, each time it's like, all right, it's time for a wave of dudes with shields sort of thing, they will come in via a subset of those entrances based upon the sort of challenge definition. And so a bunch of these rooms are going to have a significantly larger number of little alcove areas that don't necessarily lead to somewhere else in the level, but are just sort of set aside just enough to be a place where enemies can spawn. I might even do some dynamic entry, like from the ceiling kind of stuff. We'll see if that works, but it's something I want to try. So yeah. So here's one, as I said, with a bunch of stairs. Let's pull up. Here's another that has, once again, more asymmetric. 3 entrances so far. I might put a 4th one in here. Multiple stair paths up. I want more verticality in these. Not a ridiculous amount of them. Like, as I said, Northeast Dakota goes a little too far with it. It is not fun in VR, aiming up at a 70-degree inclination, but a little bit more engagement up and down, I think, would be very much welcome. Let's see here. This one, I'm not sure I'm going to go with this prototype, but one of the things that I'm definitely considering playing around with, both in the hold points and in other parts of the level, is actually having some falling hazards. Now, what I mean by that is I don't want to add fall damage generically to the game, because frankly put, everyone's way too used to being able to fall whatever distance they want, and the locomotion tools make it really fun to fling yourself up or rotor up, and I think it's a absolute killjoy to add fall damage. But I think it would be cool to have like some like a lower electrified floor hazard or something like that, just as a feature, as a touch, something that makes a specific room unique. And that's something that I want to play around with this level is making sure that there's at least 4 or 5 of the hold rooms have a feature of them that is hazardous beyond the enemies that are present. So this one, as you can see here, has some areas that you could definitely accidentally fall into or knock Sosigs into and have them be electrified and explode. As I said, that one still needs some more work. I don't think it has enough integrated cover in it yet. 24 by 32 one. Ah, yes. This is a 4-story experiment. I have been having so much fun just like looking at, and as I said, ripping off famous brutalist architecture. I saw this style of stairs in one of them and was like, I'm a model that. So So yeah, and a lot of these, it's one of those things that like the actual node is going to be fairly low down, but the tactically advantageous place to be once the actual engagement begins is probably going to be 1 or 2 stories up. So there's definitely going to be that tension between like, oh, I've activated the point and I need to get into place real fast, which is something that I always enjoy. I like it when it's non-obvious or not necessarily easy to immediately get to where would be the perfect place to fight from. This one, I'll blow out some columns momentarily so it's easy to see. Not all of the hold points, obviously, are going to be these like I'm facing threats from every direction kind of design. Some of them are still going to be closer to this, where there's there's a fairly obvious back corner that's an elevated position. You've got a column here you can work for cover. You've got a column here you can work for cover, that just allow you to be a little more defensively minded. I haven't yet decided whether I want to use the actual dynamic cover pop-ups or not for this 3rd level. That'll be a decision that I actually make once it's together and I'm play testing with it. I may actually make some new types of those little cover pop-ups. I've got more space to play with, which is exciting. Got another one here. Once again, massive. These, by the way, are the fake Sosigs for scale, just to give you an idea of these. As I said, I really want the theme of this level to be like epic architecture. Lots of sort of light streaming down. I'll see if I can get some semi-performant sort of like light beams or pseudo-volumetric light coming down if it looks right. Otherwise, there'll just be some really dramatic, nice, bounced global illumination kind of look. It's totally my shtick. I love it. So one of those, and then this is the largest. This is sort of like the new version of the Red Room, which is I've wanted to do this for ages, which is I have always wanted to do a hold point or a piece of a level or something that is basically a rail station. And so this is what I mean by having a sort of dynamic threat. Or hazard in the level of basically there'll be these 2 maglev trains. They're the sort of wraparound ones, so the train will actually protrude down from the rail. So even though this will be a route that Sosigs and the player can sort of pass across to get from one place to another, if you happen to be standing there, or if a Sosig does, when the train comes by, it's just going to pace you. So, and this is I believe this is a 96 meter long hallway here. So making long range shots is definitely going to be challenging. And I wanted to make sure to, even though this is a purely indoor level, actually make it so that there were a couple hold points that are going into this design where magnification would be really, really helpful if you're shooting the whole length of it. So, but as I said, none of these should be looked at as being absolutely final. These are still in the blockout stage. I actually have a dedicated texture artist right now who's in the process of building me trim sheets and repeating texture sets in the Brutalist sort of concrete theme for this specifically so that I can just focus on the design part of it here. And yeah, I'll just be continuing to work on that. Now, I'm sure a bunch of you are like, well, game planner stuff. So this tile set, the way that I'm building this is that I'm going to build a take and hold level out of this first. But because of the fact that this is still going to be a kit, there's still going to be halls. I probably will end up designing more of these epic architecture spaces than may even fit in a single take and hold level. I'll be producing at least one more, probably more than that eventually, other levels that won't necessarily be built for take and hold, but would just make really great, more compact game planner sandbox levels for whatever y'all want to build out of them. So this will go into the game in multiple forms. And yeah, as I said, I'm just trying to learn from everything that has happened with the game over the past years, the mistakes I've made as a designer in the past, the things that I've learned, and just get into gear producing some cool new environments. And I've heard you all being like, the guns or the ARs are very nice, Anton, but can we have some new places to shoot them? So that is what I'm working on. Now, for what is going in this week's update. The main feature, and this is why it's actually on alpha instead, because this isn't a huge update, but why I wanted to make sure to test this on an alpha branch first. Many of you have noticed in the past when playing Take and Hold or anything else that pulls from an object table, that because there are certain types of weapons that we have a bajillion variants for, like the MP5s, any generation table that overlaps those weapons tends to over-represent them because they're all just being evenly randomly weighted. So if there's a pool where there's like 10 unique SMGs, but also 15 MP5s show up that intersect that table, that means like 1 in every 2 guns you get is an MP5. That's non-ideal. This will become more and more of a problem as more types of AR-15s go into the game over this next year. And so I have written what's called an object family system. It's super simple. It's basically just a string field in the FVR object system. But what it basically means is that every time a table is being dynamically built as it's ingesting objects, it basically goes, every time it pulls an object in, it goes, oh, do you have a family tag? Oh, do I already have this family tag registered? If it doesn't, it creates it and brings the weapon in, adds 1 instance of that family to the table. But if it already has that tag registered, it discards the weapon basically. And when you end up going to generate a random object from that table, if it then picks an object that is a family tag, it then does a second passive generation and picks a random one that is valid for that table. And so in practice, what this would mean is that, like, let's say we have an object table where there's like 3 non-AR-15 weapons and then 10 AR-15s. You're going to get an AR-15 weapon 1 out of 4 times, and then each time it'll be a sort of a random one within that subpool. So hopefully I wrote that code correctly. I have not had enough time to really deeply test it. It doesn't appear to error, but I don't know what the sort of statistical randomness is going to feel like now. So, and thanks to DD Random, Ole, and Star Yoshi, I put the metadata in for the various weapons that have subvariants, everything from 1911s to we have 2 SPOS 15s and yada, yada, yada. So all those types that have subvariants now will be evenly weighted against other objects of that type. So in certain cases, it should really change the incidence percentages of various weapons coming up and taking hold. So I would love you all to like test that out this week and like tell me what you think. Does that actually feel better? Because obviously I'm proceeding from the assumption that this is a desirable thing to do from a weapon generation standpoint, but I don't know. So you'll have to tell me if you like how it feels now, and it may take playing a whole bunch of runs for you to even tell whether this was a good idea or not. So I hope it was. So that's in there. And then just a whole mess of bug fixes, just like little things. But basically, while I had been gone for 2 weeks, a slow pile of bug reports had filled up. And so I just went in and tried to fix as many of those as possible for this week. Whew. And then speaking of trips, for the last part, next week will be, assuming nothing explodes, the main branch release of this, which is update 109, is very small, in part because I am once again going away. I've been asked to give a talk at a cool game dev conference in Croatia. Reboot Develop Blue. It's a little terrifying. I don't really get on long plane flights. I've never been to Europe before. But I was invited to give a talk. I'm going to give one on H3 and I'm still coming up with the appropriate title for it, but the talk is going to be about like, why is it so hard to make a good VR shooter? So I'm going to be given just a lightning fast talk about all the things, all the problems I've run into in 7 years of working on H3 and a bunch of solutions for them, and enjoying a little bit of that Adriatic Sea spring weather. So that means that I will, after next week, be gone for another 2 weeks as I head out there and hopefully, knock on wood, don't like crash into the ocean or something. Chill out, Anton, chill out. Anywho, so that's what the plan is. So as I said, short update here. I'll be gone for a bit and then I'll be back, and then May we'll be back straight into high intensity level production. And my goal is to ship a level of some kind to you folks in May. I don't know, it probably won't be this take and hold level. It'll probably take a little bit longer, but I'm going to ship something to you. Probably will be the desert level now that I'm thinking about it, but we're going to get a new scene into this freaking game, I swear. So anywho, I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Check this out on the Alpha branch if you want to try out the new sort of weapon incidence changes and take and hold, and I'll see y'all soon. Peace.